Russell Wilson said at the Pro Bowl yesterday that the Steelers aren't far off.
It's obviously a blessing to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. I mean, just the great tradition, the football, Coach Tomlin, the guys in the locker room. I think we got a chance. We're not far off. We were one of the best teams in football for a long time, and then we just didn't finish the way we needed to.
Being down 21-0 at half against the Ravens in the wild card game would say otherwise, though. Going 0-5 down the stretch and not putting up more than 17 points in a game as an offense would say otherwise regarding the Steelers' closeness to being legit contenders and potential Super Bowl champions. Technically, yeah, sure, we made the playoffs. So last season we finished in the top half of the league, but that's really not the greatest measuring stick for your squad going forward and their potential for competing for a championship. Because we could talk about, I've said it how many times being on a mic, Tua and the Dolphins, Kirk Cousins, whatever team he's on, Dak and the Cowboys. You're not winning a championship. You're not. Maybe technically you're close in that given season when you win the 10 games, 11 games, and you make it to the playoffs. You could say you're close. You're closer than a bunch of the other teams that didn't make the playoffs. But what are you really doing? That's your ceiling. So big whoop-dee. Steelers made the playoffs. There's probably a good handful of teams that didn't make the playoffs that are positioned better to become legit contenders going forward than us. Chicago Bears is a decent example. Number 1 overall pick, quarterback Caleb Williams, all the talent in the world. They brought in an offensive head coach, Ben Johnson. He hired a defensive coordinator that was a former head coach in Dennis Allen. He's going to have him run the defense. And obviously, the Chicago Bears, they're pretty talented on offense with a bunch of their weapons, the Caleb Williams factor, all that. I mean, they actually have upside. They actually have potential. Bengals, they have a Joe Burrow. Now, they might be missing out on T. Higgins. Their defense is all over the place. Cheap owner. So that's, sometimes you just can't overcome poor organizational structure. That's one thing. But you got to have the quarterback. Bengals have Joe Burrow. Bears, they have their guy, Caleb Williams, and they're giving him an offensive coach and Ben Johnson. So, that's the thing. Where's our ceiling? It feels like with Mike Tomlin and the same approach that we're doing, this is our ceiling. 10-7, lost in the wild card. Chicago Bears, their ceiling, who knows? Cincinnati Bengals, because they have Joe Burrow, they're going to be in it every year, even if they got this whole poor organization thing that they got going because they're the Bengals. I mean, we've seen that time in and time out. But, if they can keep Jamar Chase and they got Joe Burrow, who's in a better spot going forward? Steelers, Bengals. Unless we make certain changes, we loosen up our approach on things and get things fixed. Because Shannon Sharp, on his podcast he does with Ocho Cinco, said that the Steelers are in the worst place you could possibly be as a franchise.
Because the problem is the Steelers are just good enough to be a playoff contending team, but not good enough to go the distance. And so now you're kind of you're in purgatory. You can't go to heaven. You're not in hell, but you're not advancing.
And I can't say he's wrong if this 10-7, 9-8 BS happens after another season. If it happens again, then he's 100% right. We should be for sure confident that that's our ceiling. Maybe there's an inkling of hope if Justin Fields turns into an elite quarterback going into next season. Because, again, technically, yeah, you could say you make it to the playoffs, you're technically in the mix. I've said it how many times. If you're in the dance, you got a chance. But I saw how we looked against the Ravens. And I did think in the middle of the season we were contenders when we were 10-3. Russ was cooking and everything. But I was mistaken. I definitely was mistaken after seeing how we looked against the Ravens, the Eagles, the Chiefs, and even the Bengals in that Week 18 game. And that playoff loss, too, that's the other thing. Going into that playoff game against the Ravens, I thought we had a chance. There was no reason why we couldn't win that game. But I think that's why this one hits a little different compared to, the other end of seasons in recent years. Because you can make excuses or talk yourself into why we were close after Kenny's rookie year. We finished the season off strong, so you're like, okay, this is something to build off of. Finished 9-8, almost made the playoffs. Last 9 games went 7-2. Kenny had those clutch drives. at the end of the season against the Raiders on Christmas Eve, Ravens on the road, both must-win games, and then closed it out with probably the best offensive performance for both Kenny and the offense at home against the Browns in that Week 18 game. So it's like, oh, we could build on this. This is just like year one of the rebuild. This is year one without Ben. We got our rookie quarterback in Kenny. Like, everything's going up, going forward. Even last year, at the end, we saw Mason Rudolph go 3-0, and like we fought more valiantly in that Bills wildcard loss as opposed to what happened in this Ravens game. Like, we got it to one score, and if it wasn't for, again, you could make excuses. You could talk yourself into that game playing out a different way. Oh, if Mason didn't throw that pick down by the goal line, if Pickens didn't have that fumble in the first half, we actually had a healthy defense. But we look better in that wildcard loss than this one. And we have no excuses for this game. Everyone was healthy. We're seeing the Ravens for the third time. There was no excuses. We had all this turnover, all this change. And it's still 10-7, wild card loss. We got rid of the quarterback. We brought in Russ. Everyone thought that was the problem. You know, if we could do that with Mason and Kenny and Mitch, what could we do with Russ? Oh, we fixed our linebacking issue on defense, signing Patrick Queen. We drafted Peyton Wilson. We got another cornerback, Dante Jackson. Signed Deshaun Elliott. Cam Hayward. He's fully healthy. 10-7. 10-7 again. So you could have talked yourself into why we were close in past years. But this one, I just think we hit the line in a way. And that's why if you were going to move off from Tomlin, this would have been the most valid time. So I really got nothing. That's what I mean. Like, from what I've seen up to this point, we know what our ceiling is. Unless Fields becomes an elite quarterback or we get some elite quarterback play in here. Or we overhaul the coaching staff, which is something that we're not doing, clearly. Or overhauling the team, which is also something that we are not doing. But, man, Russell's saying we're not far off. Yeah, what else is he going to say? But from me and you guys from the outside looking in, I think we all can agree after watching that Ravens loss in the wildcard game, after watching how we finished the season, like we're not even close. And then also seeing how the other rounds of the playoffs have played out, the divisional round, the AFC Championship, even the NFC Championship, going to the NFC side, seeing how those teams play. Like, we're not close to those teams. We're not. Sure, by technicality, we finished better than a bunch of other teams that didn't make the playoffs, but it might as well all be the same. And as I said, a bunch of these other teams that didn't make the playoffs, they're actually positioned better to compete with those legit contenders going forward because it's either they got young talent, they're on the come up, whatever it is, new coaches. Whereas we're just, from the looks of it right now, we're running it back and doing the same. Unless we do the whole Fields thing and give him the keys and see if he could take over. Like, that's, again, our only hope. I've been saying it over the last 2 or 3 weeks. I think it's really our only hope to get things back on track with Tomlin at the head of everything. Fields got to be an elite quarterback, or we got to get Rodgers in here, hope that he could become vintage Rodgers or trade for a Matt Stafford. So, something like that. Something a little bit more out of the Steelers' wheelhouse and a little bit more unrealistic. The most realistic thing is just signing Fields in terms of getting elite quarterback play that coincides with how the Steelers do business. Because Rooney already said we either want Russ or Fields back, and it's safe to assume whichever one we sign is going to be the starting quarterback for 2025. But Russ was also asked, speaking of Russ and potentially coming back to Pittsburgh and wanting to play here, he was asked at the Pro Bowl about the connection to the Raiders now that Pete Carroll's the head coach, and he sidestepped those rumors and said he's only focused on being in Pittsburgh. Of course, he said that he's at the Pro Bowl as a Pittsburgh Steeler, and the Steelers are his best option in free agency. We're probably, honestly, the only team that's dumb enough or is going to be seriously pursuing him in a legit way that'll pay him $30 million. I don't think any other team around the league is thinking about signing Russell Wilson to $30+ million. Maybe 15, 20, and they view him as the bridge quarterback for the next guy. Like, that's if the Raiders sign him, that's how I think they would view it. And are we even sure Pete Carroll wants him back? Now, based off one of my previous videos, I want Pete Carroll to want Russ back. Like, I gave all the reasons why I think Russ to the Raiders could be a good fit and why they should want him. But with the rumors being out there, floating, like resurfacing that Russ wanted Pete Carroll fired back in Seattle, I'm hard-pressed to believe Pete Carroll in this new position trying to get this Raiders organization right will go back to Russ. Again, don't get me wrong. I want it to happen. As I said, I made the case as to why it should, but I'm thinking it won't. But if it did, like, the Raiders are going to draft a guy in the first or the second round. I don't think they're viewing Russ as the long-term answer. Whereas, like, if we sign Russ here, he's probably going to get at least a definite shot for a full year, probably. Although we might do the same thing as the Raiders. If we bring in Russ, we could very well sign or draft a Jalen Milroe. We could draft one of these guys in day 2, a Will Howard, and have them sitting behind Russ and Russ being the mentor. We could very well do that too. But again, I think Pittsburgh will give Russ more benefit of the doubt than I think anyone else across the league that would maybe sign him. That's including the Raiders. That's including a team being led by Pete Carroll, who has the prior connection to Russell Wilson. But going back to the draft and the Steelers maybe drafting a quarterback this year, depending on if they sign Fields versus Russ, what they do in free agency. Like, it's definitely an option. We'll see how free agency plays out, but I don't think any of us, as we sit here right now, would be surprised if Steelers drafted a guy maybe in day 2, the second or third round. And we got some conflicting reports about a specific quarterback, Jalen Milroe, that may be taken in that time frame. Andrew Filipponi says the Steelers love Alabama quarterback Jalen Milroe. Believe he's a first-round talent, potential franchise quarterback. Mike Tomlin will see him next week at the Senior Bowl. Stay tuned. And then you have the duality of man right here. Mike DeFabo says, I'm hearing pretty much the exact opposite. Steelers believe Jalen Milroe will be picked well before they be comfortable taking that risk. One Steeler insider says the Steelers love Milroe. Another one says they don't. What do you believe? None of it really matters either way, because remember the Malik Willis hype. Everyone thought if the Steelers went quarterback in that draft, it would be Malik Willis. And then we saw in the first round, with every quarterback available when the Steelers were picking in the 20s, the team ended up taking Kenny Pickett. Like, no one really thought the Steelers were interested in Kenny Pickett like that. No one heard reports. No one heard any rumors. Obviously, they had visits. The Steelers showed a certain level of interest because that was the first year after Ben retired. We were going to take a quarterback, so the Steelers were just doing due diligence. Like, they talked to, I think, pretty much all the quarterbacks. I think it was like 5 or 6 of the quarterbacks, the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks in that draft. It was like Sam Howell, Matt Corral, Pickett, Malik Willis, like all these dudes the Steelers were talking to, but all signs were pointing to the team taking Malik Willis. And again, you see they ended up taking Kenny Pickett. My guess would be, if you're going to throw on your conspiracy hat here, between the two, and looking back on what happened with the Malik Willis stuff, I would actually lean Andrew Filipponi here. He initially said the Steelers love Alabama quarterback Jalen Milroe, and maybe, someone tossed Mike DeFabo some information that was like, you know what, we don't want people thinking that because we actually are interested in Jalen Milroe, because that's kind of what happened with Kenny Pickett. No one actually thought they were interested in Kenny Pickett. So they want to throw the report out there that, Jalen Milroe is off our radar. Don't believe anything you're hearing. We think that he's going to get overdrafted. He's not that good. I'm going to lean Filipponi here if I had to pick. If I had to pick between the two, just because of what took place in the Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett draft and how the Steelers did business there. But with Milroe, we saw him at the Senior Bowl this week. Jaxson Dart, he's another name that's being talked about as a second-round talent, maybe even bottom of first, second-round talent, third round, like just all in that range. It's Jalen Milroe, it's Jaxson Dart, Kyle McCord, Will Howard. So Kyle McCord and Will Howard weren't at the Senior Bowl. Jalen Milroe, Jaxson Dart were, and I did get to watch the game. And honestly, none of the quarterbacks did that good. To start off, Riley Leonard, Dylan Gabriel were all right, but it was just more conservative. Jaxson Dart had the nice touchdown. He did the flea flicker pass, threw it down the field, kind of underthrew the receiver. Could have been a walk-in touchdown if he actually put it on the money. And then had a nice run down in the red zone, down by the goal line to score. But then after that, he had two more series, and really didn't do much. Had a strip sack. The defense recovered it. And then with Milroe, it was inaccurate. Threw a couple balls in the dirt. Had some simple passes completed, like over the middle of the field on like hook routes. Showcased some of the running ability, but outside of him gaining a first down, not much else was there. 0 scoring drives with Milroe. And Dart had the one at the beginning off the flea flicker, but the ball was underthrown, had the nice run. I don't really think any of these quarterbacks were showcasing too much. I know the one guy at the end ended up having the game-winning drive, had the best stat line, but he's not someone we're seriously considering as being like the QB2 for next year, maybe being the potential franchise down the line. Like, we're talking these day 2 quarterbacks, and Jalen Milroe, Jaxson Dart, they're in that category. I mean, I wasn't that impressed. Now, is it the be-all, end-all? No, because on the flip side of it, if you were watching the game, Jaxson Dart and Jalen Milroe, they were on the same team. Their offensive line wasn't doing them any favors. Like, in a couple of those series, they had 0 time at all. So it's just that I don't know if you could take much away from what they did in this game. If anything, I think like their reputation or how they're viewed stays the same. Like Jaxson Dart, he'll give you some wow, which is what he did in the first series, but then is kind of going to disappoint you in bigger moments. And like he had a chance those next couple series to really put his stamp on the game and be the best quarterback, having that opening drive and everything. And it just fell flat, which is what he's done a lot at Ole Miss. When in the bigger games, whenever they're really asking him to step up, backs against the wall, it seems like him and Ole Miss disappoint. And then Jalen Milroe, with him, I mean, there's accuracy concerns. Like we've talked about that, some up and down play, but then the versatility, the athleticism, the arm talent, it's off the charts. So you got to see a little bit of all that with both of those 2 quarterbacks. I don't really think like I said, the stock on them goes one way or another, because I just think it is what it is, like with those 2 guys. With Jalen Milroe, you're not talking about him coming into the league being pro-ready and starting day 1. You're looking at the talent, the athleticism, all the traits and the tools, and are like, okay, wow, if he could develop in a year or 2, he can be one of those elite guys. You know, he's got, just like I'm talking about with Justin Fields, he's got all the elite traits, but can he develop at the NFL level? And then Jaxson Dart, yeah, man, I don't know with him, man. I don't know. I guess it's kind of the same thing with him. Can he turn it up another level in the pros? Because, again, at Ole Miss, I didn't see it with him. At the Senior Bowl, I didn't come away that impressed. So, well, yeah, the crazy thing about the whole like quarterback, the Senior Bowl in general was a snooze fest. It truly was. The running backs had the best passing stat lines, which is stupid. Like, I don't know why they ran those trick plays. The Senior Bowl is for evaluation. Like, what evaluation are you getting from that outside of the receiver catching the ball? I think it was just flat out stupid to do trick plays, specifically those type. The flea flicker, that's one thing, but running back passes, who is gaining anything from that? What good does that do anyone trying to actually evaluate these quarterbacks? Like, because even the running backs, bro. Running backs, you want to see running the ball. You don't want to see them passing. Like who cares? Is because one of these running backs, they threw a touchdown pass, is that getting them a higher draft spot? No, not at all. It was just, I think that was absolutely stupid. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on some of this recent Steeler news that has popped up. Russ talking at the Pro Bowl, saying the team's close, and then these conflicting reports on Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe. And again, Jaxson Dart was one of those guys that's going to be in that like draft timeline of day 2, day 3. But Will Howard, man, I'm telling you, bro, like he would in terms of those guys after like Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, and I would even argue Will Howard might need to start getting considered in that Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders class. Like, but in the next tier, I think it's Will Howard before any of the other dudes for sure. And we didn't get to see him at the Senior Bowl, but he doesn't need to be at the Senior Bowl with how he ended his college football season. Not at all. But yeah, I'd say Will Howard, and then you got the next guys. It's Milroe, Dart, and McCord. I would definitely have Howard above any of the other players at this point in that tier 2. And like I said, I don't know why Howard isn't being considered as like a first round lock or even being considered in the same class as like Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. But hey, that's another conversation for another day. We still have a lot of offseason ahead of us between now and the draft. So, and we got to see too what the Steelers do with Fields, with Russ, and if drafting a quarterback would even make sense. Like if we go with Fields, I think it makes more sense to not draft a quarterback because he's still on the younger side. You could basically view him as like a rookie quarterback, even though we got to see him last year in the Steelers system, but he's still only going to be 25, still has all the talent, still has all the upside. So as opposed to having 2 guys that you're trying to build for the future, why not just have one and then see if you get your answer on that? If you don't, then go to the draft again in 2026. Now, if you go with Russ, it makes a lot more sense to draft a quarterback. I'm not even saying with Fields that, like, I could still see a world where if one of those tier 2 quarterbacks falls in the 3rd round or something, it could make legit sense to be drafting a quarterback. Maybe even the 2nd round, depending on what we do in free agency. Like if we get a T. Higgins, we take care of our defensive line in free agency, and all we have really going into the draft is like a running back need, then it wouldn't hurt you to take a quarterback in round 2. But yeah, that's all, again, stuff that we're going to find out in the upcoming weeks and months before the draft, and we'll have a more clear picture on what's the right way to go about things and what's the wrong way to go about things when it comes to the draft. Let me know your thoughts, though, about the topics discussed on today's show. Stay chillin'. Peace.